She puts an order in for Hershey Kisses.
I would take, no, just Hershey Kisses. Yeah. I don't remember either.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Town of Foxborough Financial Summit. This meeting will be broadcast live and recorded by Foxborough Cable Access. So tonight it's a collaboration. We have the advisory committee here, the school committee, obviously Paige Duncan, our town manager, and Marie Almodova. Am I pronouncing that right? I never say your last name.
No, you got
That's
it right.
why.
You got it right.
Are going to kind of lead us to, and to be giving, going everything through the information, and then we'll be having a little discussion on what is up for our 2026 budget.
Thank you, Stephanie.
People have to open up.
Yeah,
meetings,
you.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. We got more advisory committee. You guys want to open your meeting first?
Sure. So, calling the advisory committee meeting to order.
You're not gonna have school committee.
Not enough school committee yet, so.
Okay. All right. Oh, do you guys have to take a second?
All in favor? Aye.
Awesome. And so, when are you? It's because it's just Brent. We're not going to open.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. Perfect. All right.
Great. Well, just as by way of introduction, thank you all. As you know, this is held annually as we endeavor to begin our budget cycle, which will begin next week in earnest. We are up against a bit of a time crunch tonight. The school committee is meeting at 6:30, so we have 1 hour. We're asking that when Marie goes through her presentation, you jot down your questions so she can get through her presentation, and then we'll do questions at the end in the essence of time, because we don't want to hold up the school committee. And we do anticipate more members will likely be joining us as this goes on. So in the interest of time, thank you all so much for being here, and I'm going to turn this over to Marie.
Thank you, Paige. So this is the agenda for tonight. So I'll go over, as quickly as possible, I'll go over the financial policies and update on those, the closeout of fiscal year 24, where we are in the current fiscal year. We have some comparison charts for taxes. Then I'll get into the 5-year forecast. Then into some budget history, debt service, and then finally, some current and long-term budget pressures, and then finally the budget strategy for fiscal year 26. So this is just a quick little thing here. So the town was able to, or we earned our second GFOA Budget Book Award. We're hoping, obviously the goal is to maintain this going forward, but the next one that we'll be aiming for is the annual comprehensive financial report, which is essentially it's a supplement to your basic financial statements. So be on the lookout for that within the next couple of years. So financial policies update. Some of you may recall that we did, the select board voted for some updates to these policies back in September to better align with best practices. So here I have, the unassigned fund balance, the target is no less than 5% with a goal of 5 to 10% of the general fund operating budget. As of the end of fiscal year 24, we were at 10.6%. The unassigned fund balance plus stabilization fund target is no less than 10% with a goal of 10 to 15% of the operating budget. As of the end of fiscal year 24, we were at 16.15%. The stabilization fund, no less than 5% with a goal of 5 to 7% of the budget. We were at 5.55% as of the end of fiscal year 24. The next one is the capital stabilization fund. For this one, we aimed for at least $100,000 with a goal of $2 million. The balance on this as of June 30th was $305,378. The next one is the overlay reserve fund with a target of at least $440,000 each year. The FY25 overlay came in at $1,708,000. And this was due to some new growth. When we were setting the tax rate, there was a lot of new growth captured on the personal property side. So that's the reason for that balance being higher. But usually it's between $1 million and $1.2 million. The next one is the operating budget reserve, or the reserve fund. So we target no less than 1/10 of 1% of the net estimated revenues. The current budget is at $75,000, but for 26, we're looking to adjust that. And then free cash, the target is 3 to 5% of the general fund operating budget. As of June 30th, we were at 9.5%. The reason for this, we did have a high free cash number, came in at $8.3 million. This was the highest since fiscal year 2018, and I'll get into a little bit more of that shortly. Fiscal year 24, so we'll get into the revenue collections. So overall, general fund revenue collections were $4.1 million higher than our estimates. Enterprise funds were $384,000 higher than our estimates. Tax collection, overall percentage collected was 99.4%. State aid was 97%. As we drill into some of the details, local receipts were 143.1%, or $4.8 million higher than our estimates. And some of the areas where we exceeded our projections was investment income, permits, the payment in lieu of taxes, and our hotel and meals tax. On the tax collection side, even though we collected 99.4%, we were actually short by $393,416. On the state aid side, we were short by $364,217. And the surplus in local receipts was essentially used to offset this $757,000 deficit. On the enterprise fund side, we had water revenue collections were at 103.6% collected, and sewer revenue collections were at 102.9%. On the expense side, we had budget closeouts totaling $1.8 million. I identified the departments that had budget closeouts. So in fiscal year 24, we had, there were vacancies in multiple departments, the town manager's office, finance, police, DPW, health, and land use. There was also a savings due to grant funding. So in the GIS budget, we had a grant that paid for our Permitize, which is our software used by building, health, select board, and planning and conservation.
Marie, what does a closeout, what does a budget closeout mean?
That's what closed out on the expense side. So that was unspent budget monies.
It's unspent?
Yes.
It's unspent.
Yep. On the police side, they had year 2 of their domestic violence grant, which pays for 15% of the salaries of 4 officers. They also had various injured on duty reimbursements. So there was a lot of money that was coming back into the police budget. Schools closed out $341,000. Group insurance came in less than the budget at about $402,000. Once again, this is also due to the vacancies, but we usually carry a surplus in that budget to cover any adjustments throughout the year. So if someone goes from a individual plan to a family plan, obviously that's a big jump. So we try to account for some of those changes. Now, the current fiscal year, we had our tax rate certified last week. So our residential tax rate is at $13.22, and the commercial tax rate is at $17.29. On the revenue side, the current overall general fund revenue collections are $1.3 million higher, or 3.5% than this time last year. Local receipts are $931,000 higher, or 19.8% higher than this time last year. On the expenditure side, current general fund expenditures totaled $32.5 million, or 37.2% spent. Enterprise funds, water revenue collections are $192,000, or 4.7% higher than this time last year. Sewer revenue collections are $211,000, or 22.1% higher than at this time last year. But on the expense side for the enterprise funds, water expenditures total $1.8 million, or 25.5% spent, and the sewer expenditures total $715,000, or 39% spent. Now, if everyone spent their budgets equally each month, we'd be at about 42% spent. So on the general fund side and on the enterprise fund side, we're below that percentage. On the revenue side, I did want to note the interest income is still high. So that's also why our local receipts are higher there. We also did receive the money from the Patriots, or the crafts for the soccer season. We usually receive that in December. This year we received, for the soccer season, $994,000. That included the Messi game, which was considered a special event. So we actually got a little bit more money there. We also collect the fire apparatus repair fees. That money goes to the general fund, so that's money that has to be essentially counted as one time, because it's not really money that's used for the other operating budgets. This here is just a chart showing the tax rates for the last 3 fiscal years for Foxborough and all of the surrounding communities. There are a few communities that haven't had their fiscal year 25 tax rates certified yet, so you'll notice that there's about 6 of them that are blank. But for the purpose of this chart, we sorted them in order of lowest to highest based on that fiscal year 24 tax rate. So you can kind of see where Foxborough is compared to our surrounding communities. And you have, so Foxborough, Canton, Easton, Mansfield, Plainville, Stoughton, Walpole, and Rentham all have a split tax rate. This one just shows you the average single-family tax bill. Same thing, towns are organized based on the fiscal year 24 average family tax bill from smallest to largest. Foxborough's sort of in the middle there. This one shows you the average single-family value. Foxborough, once again, sorted by the fiscal year 24 numbers, smallest to largest. Foxborough values are on the lower end compared to our surrounding communities. This here shows you the excess levy capacity. Once again, it's sorted smallest to largest, and if you'll note that 10 of the 12 communities on here, including Foxborough, use up most of their allowable tax levy. So we're not the only ones around here doing that. And Sharon, I mean, you'll see that they have, I think it's 3, well, it says it on there, 3 a little over 3 million in excess levy capacity, and yet they have the highest tax rate out of all the surrounding communities. If they were to use that as levy capacity, their tax rate would be even higher. So now we get into the 5-year forecast. So the assumptions on the revenue side is that the levy limit will grow by 2.5%, plus an estimated new growth of 800,000. We are including estimated debt exclusions for the DPW facility, the 76 Main Street purchase, and the police locker room expansion. The actual bond sale for that will occur in May or June of next year. But we did receive estimated numbers from our financial advisors. So that $2,755,213 includes the old debt exclusions plus the new ones. State aid is projected to remain flat except for a few increases in Chapter 70, 1.58%, and unrestricted general government aid at 1%. We're projecting that local receipts will grow by 800,000. And on the water and sewer side, the indirect costs, so the reimbursements to the general fund, we're projecting those to grow by 56,313. And something that I did want to note, which I learned recently, I didn't know this before, but apparently when Prop 2.5 was passed, the state had promised that they would fund 100% of school costs, and that the 2.5% limit would be enough to fund the town side. Clearly, they're not funding 100% of the schools, so fortunately, I mean, this 2.5 cap really limits what the town can do, and we're not the only ones. There's a lot of communities that are in the same boat as us. But I was chuckling when I heard that the other day. The next assumption is around free cash and overlay surplus. So we're proposing to use $665,000 of free cash. So that's $20,000 less than what we use for the current budget. Overlay surplus, we're looking to use $750,000 or $10,000 more than what we use for the current budget. And the sum of these two is what's used to pay for the principal and the interest for the town hall and the borough projects. On the expense side, so on the operating side, we're assuming that base operation expenses are growing at 3%, including the schools. Debt service, as I mentioned earlier, because of the new debt exclusions, that number, we're showing an increase of 27.5% for the debt service. As I mentioned, that bond sale will occur in May and June of next year. We're using the reserve fund is projected to grow at 0.1% of the net general fund revenue. On the fixed cost side, we've been told to budget 12% for our health insurance, which is very, very high. We've been told that our claims are high, so they're recommending that we budget conservatively here. Medicare, we're projecting that to grow at 2%. The pension assessment for 26 is a $6.7 million or a 4.4% increase. And we've actually been paying attention, very close attention to that because the schedule that was put out by the county shows a 1.05 million increase for 27, which is huge for 1 year. Property and liability, once again, we were told here to budget 10%. Workers' comp, same thing, 10%. Claims are high in that area as well. The Southeastern Regional Assessment, we use an average, which is 7.5%. For OPEB, we're keeping the same funding schedule there, which is the $1,064,069. And then on the state assessment side, we're projecting that those will increase by 3.25%. This year is just a summary, the five-year forecast on the revenue side. You'll see under the fiscal year 26 column, there's a 4.12% growth there. That number is a little bit misleading because it does include the 1.5 million for the new debt exclusions, and that revenue can only be used to pay for that debt service. That's not money that we could use towards the operating budget. So when you deduct the debt exclusion, our revenue growth for 26 is actually at 2.96%, which is more in line with what we've been seeing. These are the expenditures. As I mentioned earlier, we're projecting through the 5 years, we're projecting that these will increase by 3%. And obviously the fixed costs grow at much larger rates than 3%. The other funds, so on this slide, the annual percentage growth, so on the second to last row there, you'll see the expense side growth. And at the very bottom, you'll see the cumulative deficits throughout the years. Now, it is normal to see deficits in a 5-year projection. Obviously, these numbers get adjusted as you're going through those individual budgets. So it is normal to see those, but I do want to stress the fact, obviously, the Prop 2.5 is putting a huge strain on the budget. Our revenues haven't typically exceeded 3%, so I don't anticipate that we'll see on the expense side growth more than the 3%. This here is just a budget history for fiscal 16 to 25. Overall, so the overall 25 budget, municipal departments make up about 25% of that budget. Schools are at 49%. Fixed costs for both town and school are at 22% of the budget, and debt service makes up 4% of our current budget. This here is just showing how our current budget compares to the surrounding communities. So Foxborough has the 5th lowest fiscal year 25 budget, and then we also have the 4th lowest dollar increase from fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 25. On this one, we have the 2nd lowest percentage increase from 24 to 25, and the 3rd lowest average increase from fiscal years 22 to 25. So this shows that, the Foxborough budgets have remained pretty stable. They haven't been growing out of control. So I just wanted to show you a visual just to see where we compare to our surrounding communities. This slide here shows you free cash and stabilization balances for us and the surrounding communities. You'll see these are the fiscal year 24 numbers. So you'll see that we had a free cash of 8.3 million and our stabilization fund was at 4.8 million. So we had the third highest free cash. And then it looks like it's sorted by just the free cash here. But just another visual just so you could see where we stand with the other communities. This here shows our outstanding debt. So the table on the left was our debt as of the end of June of 2024. This does not include the new debt. Those numbers will be reflected in the June 30th, 2025 outstanding balances. The debt service schedule on the right does include projected numbers for the DPW facility, the 76 Main Street and locker room. You could see those. It's the very last 3 projects under the general obligation bonds. And I did want to note, at the end of fiscal year 25, we did have almost $600,000 of worth of debt exclusions that fell off. And that was for the Ahern and the public safety building. So that essentially offsets some of the 1.5 million that we'll be taking on. debt service. So of that June 30th balance, 7.9 million is belongs to the town buildings, 14.9 million schools, 31.6 million belongs to the water enterprise. A small balance of 9,000 belongs to the sewer fund, and then 270,000 is for the septic betterment program. And on the right side is just another visual just to show how our debt is classified. Here's another visual just to show where we compare to our other communities in terms of debt. We, as of fiscal year 24, we had the fourth lowest dollar amount in outstanding debt. And then we get into some of the current and long-term budget pressures. So as I mentioned earlier, I mean, our fixed costs, we're expected to see big increases there. So 12% on the health insurance, property liability, and workers' comp, 10%. The pension costs continue to rise. Unfortunately, with the pension, I mean, even with the health and the property and liability, but specifically with the pension, we essentially have no choice there. The county has decided to, for whatever reason, they want to become fully funded by 2032. It was actually the fiscal year 2030, but they did change some assumptions in their most recent actuarial evaluation. So now they're looking at 2032. PARAC actually gives the pension systems until 2035 to become fully funded, but Norfolk County specifically is looking or targeting that 2032 fiscal year. So
I hate to interrupt, but all the town managers in Norfolk County are fighting this. We got some reprieve for this year, and I do anticipate that they see sort of the consequences of what they're doing with this aggressive schedule. So they've committed to go back and look at it and work with the communities. So we are still in negotiations for next year because this aggressive 2032 is artificially inflating, and our assessment will go up, but some other communities will go up exponentially higher. So there's quite a pushback to say, let's stick with the mandate as opposed to aggressively pushing it now at the detriment of our communities.
Excuse me, what's driving that cost?
they're saying, so one of the factors is the mortality rates. People are living longer. They did change their discount rate. I believe they're using 7.5% now, if I'm not mistaken. There were a couple other assumptions that they changed, but they're trying to do it all. When we initially got the funding schedule, our assessment was going from 6 million to 11 million. And we saw that number, we're like, wait a minute. Our 2.5% is well below that 5 million. So all of, like, as Paige mentioned, a lot of the town managers did push back. We did attend several meetings, and we were able to convince them to go back and have their actuary come up with a new funding schedule. But for now, they've only adjusted fiscal year 26. They still have to go back and adjust fiscal year 27. Because if they don't, that's, as I mentioned earlier, it's over $1 million.
I'm sorry, and we are asking for that. We don't actually know what they didn't provide us the actuarial data, so that's we're all pushing for that so that we could kind of double check their assumptions and their numbers, because this kind of came out of nowhere. Communities have been asking for months for this to be part of it, and all of a sudden they scheduled a meeting in 48 hours and laid this on us. So as you can imagine, we all went a little crazy. They moderated it for a year, but we're now in the fight for the rest of the process.
So obviously from my time on AdCom and then here, I've heard this term fully funded, okay? Does that mean that we're funded for the like right now, or the projection, like when you say out to 32, that's how I assumed it was the projection out. But won't that number just always change? Like you said, as people are living longer, as you hire more people, as the salaries go up, those numbers will just continue to change. Like, I mean, as far as like, if someone is going out at 80% and they make $50,000, right now, they can project that I guess they'll project that number to the retirement age, but as towns do what they do, whether they give 2% raises, 3% raises, 4% raises, that number can always change. So I guess my question is, I'd like everybody to be fully funded, but what's the big deal if you're not fully funded? As long as you're putting in and the money is there to pay your retirees at the time, won't that just continue to move? Does that make any sense, like how I'm thinking about it?
With the pension, we are required to be fully funded by 2040. The legislature has said you have to be fully funded by 2040. PERAC is saying 2035, just to give yourself a few years. Because like I said, these assumptions can change. But the thing is, once you become fully funded, so when we become fully funded, what will happen is, so say in 2032, our assessment will go from, I'm just throwing a number out there, from 8 million to maybe $1 million a year. So you'll have this huge drop. And this will be the same thing on the OPEB side. Now, the OPEB is not mandated by law, but when the credit rating agencies look at you, they want to see, this is a major liability on your books. They want to see that you're committed to funding this liability, but it is essentially a moving target. But eventually you do become fully funded, and your yearly contribution is not as high as it is right now.
So correct me if I'm wrong, really what you're saying when we're saying fully funded, it's the past liability. It's a catch-up process for all the employees that we never paid the full amount for their futures. We basically were only paying the current liability that was going out the door. So that's why between OPEB and pension, all the communities got into a big trouble. I mean, the state's in even worse than us, but they don't have the same requirement. Ironically, obviously they voted through. But so everybody's trying to catch up, but really aren't as many communities that have done as well as we have with the OPEB especially, as far as trying to get to a point where it doesn't hurt the town as much.
Yeah.
And to Marie's point, when it finally does drop, that gives us some breathing room.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and obviously, I'm guessing other towns, like we have developed a way to fund it.
Yes.
So other towns maybe aren't using their meals tax, and so we have found a way to do it. But I'm sure whatever decision they're making has to be doable for everybody. Well, I guess it doesn't have to be, right? Doesn't have to be, I guess. But you would think that, what are other towns doing? I mean, we have found a way.
Some are doing nothing.
I guess that money, we would be able to put that money into other places.
Right.
But at least we have found a way to help us without like the residents' tax dollars to fund it.
Yep.
Okay.
When you look at these numbers year over year, and you look at the trends, mortality rate, the average expense rate, the discount rate, life expectancy, I'm wondering why it didn't happen sooner, because the trends are very obvious, and ultimately the shoe is going to drop, and it's dropping right now.
Yep.
In terms of
they were heavily critiqued by S&P, which is one of the credit rating agencies.
Right.
I mean, when we last had our bond sale, which was for one of our water infrastructure improvements, one of the comments was that the S&P didn't agree with the discount rate that the county was using.
Right.
Essentially, they were trying to fix all of that in 1 year, which is, you can't do that. But we're hoping that they'll back off from at least the 2032 funding date and just push the schedule out to 2035 to give all of us, some breathing room and allow us to meet that obligation. So we'll see what happens there.
Brent, did you have a question or comment?
No, I was just reminding those who remember that it was 2017 that basically Foxborough started aggressively funding that historical underfunding, and we started doing it as a town long before a lot of the people that we're comparing ourselves are doing. So we've been doing this for years. We're going to get caught up before a lot of the towns surrounding us, and we've been dumping more money into this problem than most of our comparison towns. And that was probably when you and I started together.
Yeah.
So.
So some other budget pressures, obviously the supply chain issues. We're seeing significant cost increases in several areas. Our utility contracts, so our what they call our COVID specials are are going away. Our electricity contract, we're expecting to see a 32.8% increase there and a 40% increase in gas. It's still lower than what residents are paying, but I mean it's a pretty big jump. On the state assessment side, there's usual increases to the charter school assessment. There's increases to the regional school assessment. Once again, the state is supposed to be covering 100% of regional transportation. They unfortunately are not. They're covering more, I believe they told us about 80%. If they were to cover 100%, we would save about $35,000 on our yearly assessment. And then obviously there's minimal increases to state aid year after year. The funding for the OPEB, we're trying to maintain that before it becomes mandated. We have obviously the debt service for non-excluded projects that I mentioned earlier. There are staffing needs in police, fire, and schools. Funding is needed for the next 3 years of collective bargaining agreements. We do have capital needs that are coming up, the Taylor School, the PFAS treatment plants. I believe we need 2 more of those. Obviously, there's roads and sidewalks, dams, stormwater management. And then the big thing is how do you maintain the current service levels, but also try to enhance services where there are needs. Here is essentially so you have 3 options when it comes to the budget. Option 1 is a level funded budget. So essentially the available funds are kept the same. This results in a reduction of staff and services, and it prevents us from addressing any staffing and budgetary needs. Option 2, level services budget, maintains the current service levels with incremental increases based on departmental and community needs. This option is the one that you've voted for the last 2 fiscal years. Option 3 is a percentage increase limit. It places a limit on the overall percentage increase. This option does prevent the town from meeting current and future service demands and budgetary needs. As far as the budget strategy goes, there's funding that's needed for contractual salary increases and operational and fixed costs that are outside of the control of the town. The total of $106,923,226 estimated revenues, including $10.5 million for the enterprise funds. This is enough to support an operating budget increase of 3%, and this is aside from the debt service. As I mentioned, our revenue growth is slightly higher because of the debt exclusions. So when you factor in the debt exclusions, the overall budget increase, which would be, which we could accomplish, would be closer to 5%. But departmental budgets would need to be capped at 3%. Departments will put forward their needs and prioritize both current and future needs. We are suggesting that departments level fund their expense budgets, meaning they won't increase their current expense budget unless they provide documentation and justification for additional funding. Then some questions to consider. Does the town want the same level of services? Do we want to allow increases based on need, just as we did the last 2 fiscal years? How do we address the staffing and the capital needs? Does the town wish to shift more of the tax burden to the commercial and industrial and personal property classes? Does the town wish to explore other new revenue options, or approve new developments to increase the tax base? And then finally, will the town consider a future override to address some of these budget shortfalls? And then I have a final slide just showing over the last 10 years. Throughout the Commonwealth, these are the results of all of the override votes. So as you'll see, in fiscal years 24 and 25, in 24 you had 16 overrides that were approved, and in 25 you had 28. So throughout the Commonwealth, we're seeing a number of overrides get approved. We're seeing a lot of layoffs. And some of them are happening in some of the surrounding communities. Now, Foxborough has never passed an override. I looked back, and the last one that was considered was in 1997 to reopen the elementary school. That obviously got voted down. Prior to that, there were a few others in the early 90s, but all of them failed. And when you compare Foxborough to the 15 surrounding communities, we're one of 3 communities that have not passed an override. The other 2 are, let me see. I think I had Stoughton. I believe Norton was one of them. Yep, so Stoughton and Norton. But Norton was trying, I believe,
Norton tried and failed.
last year.
And we are proposing that, just to be clear, but we are raising it as a subject that is coming up in a lot of communities with the pressures that are going on. Just to be clear, the headline is not, we're recommending an override at this point.
Yeah, like I said, just another slide just showing where some of the surrounding communities, are in comparison to us. I believe that should be it. Any questions?
So what are some of the potential new revenue options that could be explored? What might those be?
Route 1, they build.
So we already do. I mean, there's really not a whole lot the town could be doing beyond what we did. We did the favorable zoning. We are working on a regional sewer study using Congressman Auchincloss's money to study that. So we are doing what we can on our side. We're waiting for Route 1 to pop, but it has not yet. So I think we're a little bit not in the driver's seat there, but perhaps there are additional options we can look at. Certainly work with Catherine and land use to consider those options.
What percent of the overall budget is labor?
Labor is about, I believe the trend showed 55%.
Okay. It's not as high as I thought it would be.
I thought that number might be higher, too. I've always been told that the salaries drive the budget, so I thought it would be higher than that.
Your fixed costs, though, are pretty high as far as percentage-wise, so.
That includes benefits?
No, that's just strictly
Okay.
salaries.
Add another
We include benefits
20%.
more,
Yeah.
it's closer to 80%.
Yeah, okay.
The labor contracts that are currently being negotiated up for renewal, does that include teachers?
Yes. And the schools work directly on those contracts.
We have 5 that are up this year.
And then there's 7.
We have 7 on
the
our
town
side.
Marie, I have a question on the collections. Obviously, shortfalls in tax collection on residential and commercial, that's just delayed, but can be obviously recouped at a later date, I assume. It's not something that goes
Some,
away.
not all of it, yeah.
The state aid, I'm a little confused on how we would have a shortfall of 364,000 on state aid. Is that from a projection on our side, or from what they said they were going to give us but didn't give us?
So when we set the tax rate, the state requires you to use the number that's on the cherry sheet.
Right.
They never give you that amount. In our case, what happened last year was the charter school calculation was redone and resulted in essentially less money coming back, or a lesser reimbursement for the charter school. And that's yet another calculation that we have no control over. But the state, if you look at the historical trend of state aid, you never get 100% of what's on the cherry sheet. They always find a way to not give you 100%.
Marie, how did we end up with over 100% for water and sewer revenue collections? Are those projections that were above?
Yeah, that was just revenue that was above the projections. So when you set the tax rate for the enterprise funds, revenues are supposed to equal expenses. So we get a projection from the water department. That's what we load into the recap sheet. But their actual revenues were much higher than that, which is good for them because they were actually in trouble.
My questions are on free cash. I think last year, if I recall, we had like, 6 million. You correct me when I'm stating numbers wrong. We have like 6 million. Today, you're saying 9.5%, which, I don't know, you're not giving a number there. I assume it's 8 million, 9 million, something like that. But 6% over the policy guide. It looks like you're gonna spend 2 million of it, some of it on debt service, some on, there was another page here, you said you're gonna spend 600,000 on one, free cash on something, and 1.3 million in debt service on another one. What's the overall thinking there? Like, looks like we're well over our policy goals. We're spending partial, and we had fairly good growth last year, basically probably because of conservative estimates in the budget. But what's just generally the thinking when it's a good amount of money there?
So
I understand what the goal is. I see the policy, but I don't know whether there's another goal of building up some cash for some sort of spend coming and that type of thing, et cetera, whatever.
Yeah, so with the free cash, we did have, it's the highest since fiscal year 18. And what happened in 24 is you had, there was the Walnut Street project, Hobby Lobby, which generated building permits of $700,000. Those are one-time permits. You had the apparatus repair fees at $336,000. Once again, that's money that has to get segregated. We include 6 concerts in our projections. And we had, I believe, I don't know off the top of my head how many concerts there actually were in fiscal year 24, but you also had the Army-Navy game. So there was a balance of $788,000 that was above our 6 concerts that were projected. You also had investment earnings that were $1.2 million.
More against the back and forth. The policy goal is like 5%, and 5% is, I don't know what is it? It's
3 to 5% of the operating
5 million
budget.
or 4 million or something, and you're at 9. So you have 3 or 4 million there. I'm just trying to understand what your thinking is on it. It seems we're touching some of it, we're not bringing it within the range that's there. And I'm not telling you to spend it, I'm just asking, like, generally, what are you thinking about that?
Well, with the free cash, we historically use it to fund our capital budget. So our CIP, obviously that we will continue. So right now, the only planned use is to use $665,000 for the budget. Once we receive the department's request for capital, we'll fund the majority of that using free cash. We also have the Taylor School coming up. So one of our policies is around the capital stabilization fund. So when you have a major project that's coming up, it's a good idea to start building up these stabilization funds to pay for some of the initial costs.
So you see moving free cash into the stabilization fund?
Yep.
That's kind of where I'm getting at.
Well, so Michael, too, even though you weren't like saying you should spend it, where were you thinking that, like, I know we're talking about, well, not that you can't.
Well, I'm not trying to use it on
good practices, not on operating. So the only other place you're going to leave it, and the 665 we're going to have to use for operating, basically, because we have to bring that into the budget. But even though that number is going up, it seems really high. We've seen, I did CIP one year. I'm sure some of you guys have, I know have said on CIP, that can range from 2 million to 5 or 6 million. So that number could go boom.
I'm not arguing for
and,
the operating budget, I'm just trying to understand, like, there's a good chunk of change. If that's the thought, that we have big capital spend coming, and we're trying to build it towards that, it's kind of getting, it's almost an exception to the policy, if you will, right? Because you're going to override it for the intent purpose of laying it aside. I was just asking, like, what is the consideration?
Well, plus I think what Marie just said too is a lot of that, we brought in a lot more money this past year to go into the free cash, so that's why the free cash, like 3 or 4 years ago was down to around 2 million, wasn't it? I mean, I know that that's just gonna go up and down, based on what comes in, what projects we have, so.
And it's hard for Marie. I mean, Marie's job is obviously to play it conservative. Foxborough wants to conservative. So, for example, if you said, oh, well, because, we X, Y, and Z is happening next year and we're going to count on it, well, then if for some reason COVID, tariffs, who knows, we don't know what's coming next. The fiscal picture should change, and then we wouldn't have those revenues. So I think Marie takes just a conservative approach. And a year like last year, where we end up with the high permit fees, and again, these investment incomes that are coming in very high with the high interest rate, but we all anticipate they're going to be dropping. That's the type of thing you can't really bank on. It's great to get it, but we don't know if next year the same numbers will come in. So that's the challenge for Marie, is to try to, it's gambling really, and she's gambling with your money, so.
That's why we set the percentage, right? That's why the percentage is a range. So going clear over the range kind of contradicts what that range really means.
Yeah, but it was basically just the year that we had.
Right.
Yeah. You won't see an $8 million free cash year after year. It was
Right.
just.
I think what Mike is asking is, are we looking to move that to certain accounts, or are we looking to keep it? Because certainly there's always going to be somebody who stands up at town meeting and says, why are we spending all our free cash? Who knows what's going to happen? There could be another COVID. We don't know, right? And I think the answer is always, well, we keep an appropriate amount in there, and that's why we have this percentage, and now we're going over the percentage. So I understand where he's coming from.
Yeah, and the free cash policy, the revised one, says that we will leave no less than $2 million at the end of each fiscal year. And that doesn't mean we should spend the $8 million down to the $2 million, but we have a lot of these one-time revenues that are driving that free cash
I wasn't
number.
asking that either, to be frank. I'm honestly, you just set the policy September, right? 3 to 5%. We're at 9, and I'm like, okay, what was the thinking when we set up 3 to 5? Do we need to immediately start moving it to, because we were going to move it to a cap fund or a state fund?
Yeah, with free cash,
That's fine.
you should be
just trying to
using it
understand the
to target
The thinking.
one-time expenses, so your capital, building up your reserves. As you mentioned, Stephanie, you really shouldn't be using free cash in the operating budget, but unfortunately, we are in a situation where we have to, but we are phasing that out. Because when I started here, we were using $1 million in free cash. We're down to $665, so we're getting there.
Every year, but, I think probably the one thing I would say is that, since I sat on AdCom, since I've sat at this table, I've pretty much been a broken record. When these contract negotiations come up and we talk about, what we're gonna advise Paige, whoever the town manager was at the time, where we'd like to be for a percentage. It's never a lack of respect for our town employees. We have fabulous employees, but I've always looked at it that the problem is most people don't get the same raises that we give town employees. So those are the people who live in town that have to fund this. So I think one time when I was on AdCom, someone looked in at the time, like say we were given 4% raises. The average, was 2.68. So most people, may not be getting that. And I guess my point is, we would love to compensate. We're all watching these, for now it's the schools, towns that are striking. And, I don't know what their budgets are, these towns, but, if we had at the end of the rainbow, there was this pot of gold and we could pay everybody what we wanted to, then that would be great. But the reality is, never say never, but I'm glad that you gave the years and whatever, because I've always been told there will never be an override in this town. And you should never say never, but the history has shown us that it's not going to get voted on, which means we have to find a way to stay at a good number, compensate our employees, but, give good services, level services, and, but the pot of money is there. And if we, we can't just keep upping the taxes for the residents to compensate when they're not getting a lot of these same, that's just how I think municipalities work. Every town, you don't, I mean, if you don't do that, then they're going to jump to another town that's doing it. But, I think everybody sitting in this room, everybody that's helped to make these decisions is trying to do the best we can. And, you bringing us the best information so we can make that decision is all we can do. It's not about not wanting to compensate or better contracts for our union people. If we could do it, we'd do it. But you can't bleed the people who are putting the money into the pot to pay these people. We just have to find a happy medium that's good for everybody. So I guess, when we sit down every year, that's how I look at it. I'd love to say, okay, let's give everybody 6% raise. But the problem is the people who pay the tax dollars, most of them don't get, heavy raises like that. So you're putting the burden on them, and it's never about not having respect or appreciation for people who work for town, because we have fabulous people that work here. So I think we'll all come together and we'll come up with with your guidance as well, come up with what's doable for us.
So Marie, when you walk through this, especially in the revenue side, 2024, we were over our estimates. It sounded very like it was a good year from a revenue perspective. We were significantly over. When you walk through the expense side of things and how a lot of these fixed expenses, pensions are going to 10%. On the expense side, there were some big additional uncontrollable expenses that are going to affect us for 2025. Can you net that out in terms of looking at 2025? And specifically, if the select board says we want you to develop the budget for the level services, option 2, then what would that look like in terms of, well, that would mean level services would have to go up by, the operating budget would go up by 2%, 5%. Do you have a sense of what that would be if that was the direction, level services?
Yeah, if it's level services, you would essentially have to break out the budget, departmental, fixed costs, and debt service. Let me actually go back to that slide real quick. So the revenues that we have available, including the $10.5 million for the enterprise fund, I'm looking at the second bullet point on the right side. We have enough revenues to support an overall departmental budget increase of 3%. And this is aside from the debt service, which is, like I said earlier, includes those new debt exclusions. So really, our revenue growth is just shy of 3%. And what we're saying is that's what we could afford on the department side. Fixed costs obviously are a lot higher than that, but we're hoping that once we see those actual numbers sometime in February, March, that those will be a lot lower than what they're telling us.
So Mr. Beck is telling me we have about 3 to 4 minutes left. So were you looking for the board to give you a direction tonight?
Yes.
Okay.
So one of the 3 options on the left side.
Did anybody else have
One question about the insurance. So 12% on health, 10% on workman's comp, and 10% on liability and property. Is that a year-over-year increase that we can expect to see, or is this a standout year?
That's what they're telling us, yeah.
Meaning every year we can see an additional 10% on top of what we're paying?
They said this year it's getting, they actually said that it's been, we just met with them 2 days ago, and they said they feel peaking at the sort of bad time. It's been 10 to 12 for the past few years, and they said they think they start to see the market breaking a little bit, so they're hopeful for next year. But from from a forecasting point of view, they are always recommending around 10.
What is driving those costs? Is the use of workman's comp, does that influence the amount we pay? So even the health insurance, if we use the health insurance, they're going to increase the costs of our...
Yeah, if your
God.
claims are very high, which we have very high claims.
So through Maya, we're basically a self-insured group. So
But
it's
using it
directly
is
to rates.
we're being penalized for actually using an insurance.
Well, you're being,
The whole thing with insurance is they don't want to pay out, so if they do pay out, you get punished.
yeah, you're not being, no, you're not being penalized, but if
Okay, right.
you paid in $1 million and you used $1.1 million, obviously they've got a shortfall they've got to fix. And because this is not an insurance company that looks to make money, which is not like a Blue Cross or whatever, you still have to make our pool, which is how many communities in Maya? 100 something, I believe. Basically, that pool has to stay solvent. So that's what the rate increases are basically doing, is just keeping the pool.
Okay, so it's not just Foxborough.
No,
It's
no,
all
no.
towns.
And quite honestly, within the pool, if our use is lower than somebody else in the pool, the rates are different between the communities that way too. So you get a benefit if you actually were to have less workers' comp claims than every other community. But, it's not like wild benefit, but you do get a benefit.
And just so you know, we did look into it, and we haven't been out to market on insurance costs, so we are looking, just so you know, since 2010, I don't believe, from our records, we haven't been, so we are looking at other options. We're not committing to anything, but we certainly want to explore the market right now to make sure that we're getting the best for the town, so.
Yeah, and the only problem with that, quite honestly, or not problem, but it's not as simple as just saying we find a better program, because we have to go to every single union and bring them together in a process too, which we've done in the
Probably why we haven't
past, and we've
changed
been
it since
successful at
2010.
too, but it takes time,
I'm a
so.
glutton for punishment, I guess. But they did say we might be in a good position, it might be worthwhile, because we haven't gone to market in so long. They said that communities that go to market and haven't, they tend to see a better return. So we'll see, we're researching that right now, and we are with unions, so it's kind of a good time, but, I'm not sure we will make a move, but it was certainly exploring our options to ensure we're getting the best for the town. So I think we are on time, so I think we are looking for direction from the board on guidance for the departments and their budgets.
I'll move option 2, level service budget.
Second.
Yep. Any other discussion? Dennis, do you have any other thoughts?
I prefer option 3, frankly.
Oh, well, but option 2, with option 2, we were going to give the 3% too, right?
Based on the available revenues.
Is option 3, like if we said to you, we want to give you 2.5%? Is that why it says percentage?
Yeah,
if
option
we
3
want
would
to go lower?
be, say if our revenue growth was 6%, but you still wanted to cap the budgets at 2%, that's what option 3 would be.
Yeah.
Option 2 gives you level services, but what we're saying is the revenues can only support a 3% increase, so
Yeah,
that's essentially.
so would be,
recommending that.
did you have a different idea? Did you want lower than 3? Or?
Well, I think it's early to really determine how big the shortfall is going to be, or if there is going to be a shortfall for this year, because that's your starting point. And then, like was said, 80% of the budget is labor. Only 20% is, non-labor. So that's about 17.5 million. So I think we just need to look at both separately in terms of, it may be a different target, as we go forward, if we want to really slow the growth going forward. The labor expense is what is most concerning.
I know, and if we could know the numbers, how they're going to start to pan out as we go on and know that here, but your departments need to know. Obviously, they're going to be starting.
Yeah,
If they haven't already, I'm sure they have started, but,
You
yeah.
have to submit budgets to us by December 11th, so we need some
That's what I
guidance.
thought. That budget book is usually coming out that first week in January, right, to look at.
So Marie's comfortable with the 3%
Yeah.
on the expense side. She's accounted for the other issues that you've mentioned, Dennis.
I've accounted for the fixed cost increases, the debt service and all of that. And what I'm saying is 3% is what we can afford.
So that'd be total of 3%.
Just departmental, so you have to break out the budget in three
Yeah.
segments. So departmental, budgets,
Yeah.
fixed costs, and debt service. What I'm saying is
Okay.
3% for the department.
And it's really on
Debt
expense side.
service is
and
what
it's on
debt
ex-
service is. There's no.
Yeah.
And when we talk departments, we're talking expense, because we still have the whole negotiations on the salary side, but we're talking expense side.
I think maybe
Well, it's a
that's
combination.
that's
Right, it
where,
is,
Cover
yeah.
both.
Yeah.
I think that's where you were going too,
But we're not
right? Maybe
guaranteeing
is that we want to make sure we're staying somewhat lean so as the negotiations are going on, then you kind of know where we'd like you to be. Am I wording that the way you're thinking, Dennis, or no?
We're going to discuss that Tuesday night, the specific
Okay.
union discussion. This
Okay.
is more as a whole.
Okay,
Because we're not committing to 3%, to the union, this is
Yeah.
a 3% as a whole.
Yeah.
So it's the whole picture.
and that's what we've given you the last couple
Well, the
of years.
3% would have to cover lanes and step increases that are going to happen no matter if there's a COLA or not.
Yeah.
So you're chewing into that 3%, so you're not giving a 3% increase if you think that's what you're going to survive with. That's not going to,
Yeah, that won't be, okay.
that's not going to happen.
Okay,
And the excluded debt, how does that play into this year? That expense?
So,
Should be slightly reducing.
what was that?
The excluded should be reduced each year, so
Yep. Yeah,
it's already on her schedule, so that she's covering
I'm
that
talking about the
100%.
new excluded
The new,
debt.
yeah, we'll have those actual numbers. Right now, we're carrying estimated numbers, which were prepared by our financial advisors. The new debt is excluded debt, so the additional tax revenue that was generated is specifically for that debt.
It's totally separate.
So it's separate.
okay, so
We got a
so we
motion
have a
and a
motion and a second. Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor on Bill's motion? All those opposed? Okay, all right, perfect. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for helping with this discussion. Oh, and happy Thanksgiving. I don't know if we're still
Motion to
on or not.
adjourn.
Happy
Motion to
Thanksgiving.
adjourn the,
Oh, he already got rid of me. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody here in the room.
Motion to adjourn the AdCom? Second. All in favor? Aye.
Oh, we need a motion to,
We almost get out.
It's always something.
second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Hey, guys, don't forget to close out.